Good morning. Today's the feast day of St. Januarius, bishop and martyr. He was a bishop in the first centuries of the church in Milan and was martyred. And at the cathedral in Milan, Naples, that's it, in Naples. At the cathedral there in Naples, they have a reliquary that contains his blood, but because it's so old, it's hard and crusty. Almost every year on his feast day, the blood liquefies. Just kind of a little miracle for us to recognize God's presence with us. St. Paul to Timothy says, anyone who aspires to the office of bishop desires a noble task. Anyone who aspires to the office of bishop is crazy. That's not a job anybody wants. And if you do, well, like I said, you're crazy. And then he talks about deacons. And then he says, women similarly should be dignified, not slanderers. I don't know any women that ever say anything slanderous. Everybody's holy. All the women here are very, very holy. He leaves the presbyters, the priests out, so that's good. But in the gospel passage, Jesus comes to Nain and he raises the widow's deceased son. What more difficult can there be than losing one's own child and I guess losing one's husband, right? This woman is a widow, so she's lost her husband and now she's lost her son. And Jesus comes and sees this and he's moved with pity. And he says, do not weep. Do not weep. Now, if we look elsewhere at the death of Lazarus, when Jesus heard of the death of Lazarus, it says, and Jesus wept. Right? Jesus was sad at the death of his friend because it was his friend. But ultimately, he knew that Lazarus would be risen. Ultimately, he knows that those who believe in him will be risen on the last day. And so he tells this woman, he says, do not weep. Because again, he's giving her this hope of the resurrection. He tells the young man to arise. And the dead man sits up and begins to speak. And the people say that God has visited his people. God has visited his people. We see that in the nearly annual miracle of St. Januarius' blood liquefying. God has visited his people. God gives these little testimonies of his presence, of his realness. God makes himself manifest to us. God helps us to recognize that indeed he is in our midst. We should be on the lookout for those things. There's things all throughout our daily lives whereby God manifests himself to us, whereby God makes himself present to us, where we can recognize him, where we can see him. And because we know that he is there, because we know that he is with us, we should not weep. We should not be sad. We should not be dejected. We should not be angry. We should not be upset. Yes, we can look around and we can see all the horrible things going on around us in the world. We can see that the world is so utterly just broken. But there is reason for hope. And so we should not weep. And so let us ask today the intercession of St. Januarius that we may always be able to recognize God's presence among us, that we may recognize that he has indeed come to visit his people.